I rise for the purpose of a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, as you all know, this House of Delegates has really taken, as part of our responsibility, very seriously the issues surrounding public education, in particular K through 12. Earlier today, a number of my colleagues and myself had a press conference related to our initiatives that we're bringing forward this session related to K through 12. And we hope to work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle as we move these issues forward. All of us believe that Virginia students deserve the best possible public education opportunity across the Commonwealth. Our goal is, in the past and also looking forward, to make sure they're successful no matter where they live, no matter what their zip code may be. And as I mentioned, the House has really taken this as a real key responsibility and priority the last few years. And as Secretary Holton and I both like to say, whether you're a member of this side of the aisle or a member of that side of the aisle, everybody supports good public education. And we want that for all Virginians. First, let me talk a little bit about the history of what we've accomplished together. In the last budget cycle, we've invested an additional $861 million for K through 12. And that was with everybody's help. We've also provided our teachers with a 1.5% pay increase, the second pay increase in 3 years. And all of us know that the rubber really meets the road in our classrooms with our teachers and students. Now, we've also had a lot of tough choices, and those of us on the Appropriations Committee can tell you that a lot of times they're not easy to make, but at the same time, with those tough choices related to public education and funding, we've also worked to reform our educational system. And I'm proud of this House and the efforts that we've made to put more money into the classroom. And I think that's the most important thing we need to remember. When you look at funding, classroom funding has actually gone up. And a JLAC report that we received late last year showed that to be true. As a result, related to our reforms, our students are scoring higher on their pre-college entrance exams. Virginia teachers are paid more than the national average, on average. And Education Week ranks Virginia's education system 4th best in the nation, and we should all be proud of that. Currently, Virginia is spending more in K through 12 education than we spent under the last budget adopted under Governor Kane when we were going into the recession. And we've been able to do that without raising taxes. And on this side of the aisle, that's very important. Now, let me talk about our agenda for this year, because that's what we're going to be dealing with. This year's agenda, we're outlining that we talked about today in a press conference, and I'm talking about on the floor today, will basically follow on what we did last year related to teacher pay, reforming our standards of learning, and basically putting our parents and teachers back in charge of education. Now, we want to make smart, targeted investments into our educational system. And I know Chairman Jones and all of us on the Appropriations Committee are working hard to do that. This year, the House of Delegates will continue to invest in public education, enact additional reforms, and make our public education system more efficient, promote greater choice and flexibility for our parents, and encourage access in early childhood education through private partnerships. Now, school choice is an issue we debate on this floor and in the Education Committee. But let's talk about the issues that you're going to hear and see this year. First is charter schools. And we can have and will have a debate related to charter schools. But charter schools provide a great option for our families to make decisions for their children's education that they believe is important. New York has 197 charter schools, and Washington, D.C. has 115. Virginia has 9. Delegate Bell is going to be proposing a constitutional amendment that will finally set up a framework and allow us, the General Assembly, to come back and put in place a framework that encourages the creation and development of public charter schools. Delegate LaRocque is carrying legislation that will create the Education Savings Account, a new initiative that is up and running in other states. We also are going to look at how the funds for this ESA can be used for tuition, tutoring, private courses, instructional supplies for homeschooling, and online learning, and more. Now, let me talk a little bit about early education. There is, I think, a broad agreement that early education is important for student success. Now, to do that, we've got to find a delivery system that will meet that goal. Our challenge is going to be how to find the most cost-effective way to deliver a value on behalf of our citizens related to early childhood education. Let me be clear. Universal pre-K would be very costly for our state and could lead to increased class sizes and limit our ability to invest in public education in the future. And I don't support universal pre-K. But what we do need to focus on is increasing early childhood access, education access, break down the barriers between our public and private providers, and incentivize ways to get more children access to pre-K or early childhood education. Now, we will have several measures to be looking at this issue and to bringing forward and solutions related to early childhood education and that public-private partnership I mentioned. Delegate Greason will be creating a pilot program to test a mixed delivery early childhood education model, and will be providing, I hope, Mr. Chairman, funding in the budget for those pilot projects. Delegate Greason also has a piece of legislation establishing a stakeholder committee to explore how to break down barriers and limit the use of private providers. For those of us on the pre-K joint subcommittee, we found that there are a lot of challenges in getting our public and private sector entities to work together to serve more children. So we're going to look at that. Delegate Massey will look at expanding the eligibility of his successful education improvement scholarship tax credit that will include early childhood providers that can serve more children in more parts of the Commonwealth. Now, let me real quickly, Mr. Speaker, before I conclude, talk about some of the innovation reforms that we have. No one has been more committed to education reform over the last several years than this House, and I congratulate each member on their work related to that. We have passed dozens of bills to cut red tape for local school leaders and teachers. We've enacted reforms to ensure that money is spent in the classroom and not lost in the educational bureaucracy. And we've led efforts to reform our standards of learning, which we should all be proud. We are continuing our multi-year effort to make major innovations in public education in the Commonwealth. And we'll have legislation from Delegate LaRocque prohibiting Common Core from being implemented in Virginia, and that's on the calendar today. We have a parental notification law that I'm carrying, Mr. Speaker, that you're familiar with, to make sure students are not prematurely exposed to sexually explicit materials, and more importantly, that parents are involved in that process. Our Majority Leader, Delegate Cox, has, and I believe this is on the calendar today too, legislation strengthening Virginia's Guaranteed Assistance Program. Delegate Greason will have legislation that makes sure higher education is represented on our SOL Innovation and Reform Committee, which is very important. And last but not least, Delegate Rush is going to have legislation allowing colleges and universities to offer flat fee degrees, which is a great higher education reform. So, Mr. Speaker and ladies of the House, first let me thank you all for your attention. And I congratulate each member on the work we've done and the work we can do this session to improve our public education, both K through 12 and higher education this year. We want to work across the aisle. We want to work with the administration as we move these efforts forward. And we look forward to, I think, an even more successful public education and higher education session than we've ever seen before. So thank you all very much for your kind attention.